Hey, how are you doing? Well, however you're doing, which I hope is good. I hope at least somebody's having a good day. I never really seem to have those. Or maybe it just feels like that because of my particular situation. But if you were tuning in hoping to hear a story, well, then you're in luck. Because trust me, buddy, I've got one. But I suggest you buckle up. Because this story, well, this is gonna be a bit bracing. It started somewhere around a year ago. I was just being shuffled awake, I suppose you could call it. All I really remember from the very beginning is a voice that seemed to call out to me. Well, how long? How long are you just going to lay there? Don't you think you've rested long enough? Dream time is over. The waking world beckons you. There are many destinies in the world, and yours is very important. You have a destiny, my friend. I suggest you wake up and claim it, the voice said, as I sat there in darkness, feeling like I was just floating there. The voice seemed to come from everywhere, directionless, sourceless, but it felt like I could hear it in my mind, body, and soul. It felt like the words were important. Why, I couldn't tell you. I just had the sense that they were. It was at that point that I heard a different voice. This time it sounded like a woman, except she seemed to be muttering something. Or no, not muttering. It was just muffled. It sounded like she was speaking, but there was something in the way, like someone talking in a different room. Slowly, I began to feel. I could feel that I was laying down, a hard surface beneath me. As I began to move, I quickly found that I was in an enclosed space. And as I began to move, feel around, I found that was a very sealed, enclosed space. In the moment, I began to panic, thrashing against the inside of this container. What was going on? Why am I in this thing? In a frenzy, I started wailing on everything around me, punching, kicking, knuckles, knees, and elbows, whatever. And that's when I started to feel that above me, it was giving. It felt like wood. Whatever container I was contained in was made out of wood, and the top was buckling. The more I wailed on it, the more I seemed to begin to hear cracking, and saw the wood above me beginning to give way. And from through the cracks, I began to see it. Light. The more cracks that formed, the more light that poured through, the more I felt hopeful. For obvious reasons, being locked inside some sort of a wooden box made me feel trapped. But as I wailed on the top section of this container, and it gave way, more and more pieces of wood breaking away, and finally, I tore my way through it, ripping out of the top of the container in a complete and utter frenzy as I scrambled into the open air, dragging myself through the hole that I had torn in the box. And what I found on the other side, many things could be said about it, but I believe the most honest was, what the hell? As I pulled myself out of the box and began to look around, I seemed to still be on top of it. As I looked down at the box that I crawled out of and around at my surroundings, I found that I was in a hole. The box that I was in seemed to be covered in dirt. What the hell is this? I thought to myself, looking about the hole curiously. The hole was in a rectangular shape, and the box that I was in seemed to be oddly shaped. I didn't really understand it. I was just glad to be out of that box. And that's when I heard her. Well, don't take all day. Up! Up and at 'em! We have things to do. I'm a very busy woman. Get your lazy skeletal asses up! The woman's voice called out from outside of the hole. Feeling curious, I began to stand up, reaching towards the outside of the hole. As I did, I actually took stock of the fact that I had arms and hands, which for some reason struck me as odd. Once again, I couldn't tell you why. In fact, there was something odd about my arms and hands. In the moment, once again, I really couldn't explain to you why I felt it was odd. I knew that they were arms and hands. This I understood. But for whatever reason, I also knew that they weren't normal. They were long and slender, white, and covered with dust. But there was also these strange patterns that seemed to be carved into me. They were very pretty to look at, glowing a dull green light. Giving my arms a bit of a tap, they made a clicking sound as my fingers touched my arms. Click, click, click. Which, once again, at the time, I couldn't explain to you why it felt like it was abnormal. I mean, it was perfectly normal for me. At least, it should have been. I had never really known myself. In fact, I didn't know anything about myself. As I tried to recall anything, the only thing that I could recall was that strange voice calling out, telling me to wake up. Ugh, what's with the lollygagger? What are you still doing down there? Get up! I heard the female voice once again calling out from outside of the hole. Except this time it seemed to be in my direction. Before it was just scattered about, but now it seemed more directed. And getting more and more curious about this voice, I reached my hands up, clasping the outside of the hole, and with a fair amount of ease, pulled myself up, crawling through what seemed like freshly dug dirt. I wonder, is this how all people are born? Do people come out of holes? I thought to myself, as I clambered to the top and began to stand to my feet. Taking stock of my surroundings, I seemed to be in some sort of strange location. I guess this is where people are born? I thought to myself as I looked around curiously. There were lots of other holes that seemed to be dug into the ground, and other people, like me, seemed to be crawling out of them. They were all white. Many of them had tattered rags covering their bodies for some reason. Some of them still had this strange substance over their bodies, some sort of taut material that clung to them very tightly. You could still see their bodies underneath it, and they all seemed to be clambering out of these holes and walking in a single direction, towards a woman who stood there looking very strange. She wasn't as thin as the rest of us were, and she had some sort of substance over her body as well, except it wasn't taut like it was with the other ones that were crawling out of holes. It seemed much denser, fuller for some reason. For whatever reason, the name that popped into my head was Flesh. She had flesh. I don't know why I knew that was what it was called, but I knew. She seemed to be wearing clothing that was much better than the tattered rags everyone else was wearing. A purple dress. She was, of course, a woman, which, once again, I knew what that was. There were two types of people, men and women. She was the woman. She seemed to be shouting out orders to the other people who were crawling out of holes, telling them to pick up tools from a pile and start digging. "Come on, I don't have all day. Move your skeletal ass," she shouted abruptly. Feeling a bit confused and wanting to get some answers, I approached her, as she seemed to be yelling at some of the other people. Hello? Why are you shouting? I mean, what's the big hurry?" As I spoke, she turned around rapidly, facing me with a stunned expression. "What in the blazes?" she shouted, jumping back and seeming to grab some sort of object out of one of the long sleeves that ran from her arms. Some sort of twirly stick. "Amaparis!" she shouted, as suddenly a bright light seemed to emit from the stick. It had sort of a dull gray hue to it, and as the light propelled from the stick, it hit me. As it impacted me, it forced me back a few steps. It actually sort of tickled. What was that?" I replied, as the woman seemed to look at me shocked. "Was that supposed to tickle? Because it definitely tickled." "Tickle? That's a funny word. Do all things tickle? Explain to me, what exactly tickles, and why do I know what tickles is? This is all very confusing." "You're confused," the woman said. "I'm the one that should be confused," she stated, as she began to lower the wand, as I would later find out it was called, beginning to circle me, looking me over head to toe. Hello, what's your name?" I asked, as she circled me, looking me over, every once in a while poking me with that little wand in her hand. "What in the blazes are you? How are you talking? You couldn't possibly be a true undead. That usually takes effect instantly. Why on earth would you wait until you were nothing but bones?" "Bones? Yeah, bones. It's what's underneath the flesh, right?" I said, looking to her as she finally stopped circling. "What exactly is a true undead? In fact, what is undead? Are you undead?" "Well, yes, of course I'm undead. The question is, how are you? By all means, if you were true undead, you would look like me. But instead, you look like one of them." "What, you mean those people over there?" I said, pointing to the others who were crawling out of holes. "No, those aren't people. Those are low-ranked minions. Skeletal servants. It's one of the primary benefits of being a necromancer. You get others to do your work for you. Well, after they die, at least. But you are completely outside of the bounds of what I was trying to create. The spell that I used couldn't possibly have made you," she said, as she approached, tapping me with her little wand. "What on the blazes are these green markings? They seem to be suffused with a great amount of magic. And not only that, you seem to be nearly unaffected by my spell." "Spell? What's a spell?" I asked, as she zoomed in, actually bending her head down and sticking it all the way inside of my chest, which, once again, tickled for some reason. She wasn't actually making physical contact with me, but for some reason it gave me a tingly sensation. Could you stop that? That tickles. So you can feel me, even when I'm not touching you?" she asked, looking at me curiously. "Yeah? Is that strange?" "Yes, well, I'll say it's strange. You, my friend, are curious in more ways than I can really put a count to." "What is your name?" she asked, looking at me sternly, crossing her arms and tapping that little wand on her arm. "My name? I don't really think I have one of those. Are you supposed to have one of those? Now that you bring it up, it kind of feels important. Why? I don't know. It just does, I said, crossing my arms and tapping one finger on my arm as I thought about it. I suppose it doesn't really matter what your name is. Nothing but bones, after all. How you're up and moving on your own, with the level of consciousness that you possess, is quite frankly an aberration. It's abnormal to every degree I can think of. It doesn't make any sense at all. Well, how about for now, you just call me Bones? Since I'm nothing but Bones, it sort of makes sense. Well, you certainly have a curious attitude for someone who's awakened from their grave. Grave? I'm sorry. I really don't know what a grave is. For whatever the reason be, she started to smile as she looked at me. Don't you worry. I'll teach you whatever you need to know, my skeletal friend. Welcome back to the world of the living. I do believe that your story is going to be quite interesting.